Hello and welcome back to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 24th June 2025 and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed manner. Right? So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's understand the first topic. And this article has been given in Indian Express newspaper, and in fact this is a very important for the Gender Studies paper 3 section, and this is with respect to India and US trade agreement and how it is going to impact some sectors or some arenas within India's agriculture sector, particularly the sugarcane industry as well as the soybean industry. Now we will delve deep into this topic to understand this in a very in-depth manner. Now it is being said that India and US have set July 9 as a deadline. So July 9 as a deadline so that they could finalize a bilateral trade deal. And here I would like to tell you that for India, US is the largest trade partner. Right? And in fact, India is also enjoying the large trade surplus with US. So we have a large trade surplus with US. I hope you knew what exactly is a trade surplus for India. Now here, India exports more goods. India exports more goods than what it imports from USA, and that is trade surplus. Both India and US have been looking to finalize a bilateral trade deal before July 9. Right? So they have set a deadline so that they can sign a trade deal by July 9. However, two major Indian agri industries are expressing concern for this trade deal because this trade deal will have a potential impact on two major Indian agricultural industries. Right? So I hope it is clear. Now what are those two major Indian agricultural industries? The first is the sugar industry. First is sugar industry. So I will explain you what is their main concern, but first understand, first is the sugar industry and second one is the soybean industry. Right? So these two agri industries have expressed concern on the bilateral trade deal between India and US. Now in fact, the sugar industry has been opposing the import of ethanol. Right? So in fact, USA is known as the largest producer of ethanol in the world. And in fact, in 2025 prelims examination also this has been asked. In prelims examination, both the US and Brazil were given and a question has been asked about the largest producers of ethanol. And in fact, Indian sugar industry opposed the import of ethanol and the genetically modified maize. And in fact, the genetically modified maize import into India, so this will not be used as a food. Rather, it will be used as a feedstock to generate ethanol. Now understand, in India we would like to generate biofuels because if we can generate biofuels, we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And we have been importing around 85% of the fossil fuels or the crude oil from other countries. So there is a huge dependency of crude oil for India. And apart from that, crude oil or other fossil fuels also contribute to the global warming. It also contributes to the global warming, and India will not be able to meet its obligations. Right? So therefore we have a ethanol blended petrol program. So all these programs are already in place so that over a period of time we will start blending ethanol into the petrol. And here ethanol is produced from the biological sources, right? So biological sources are being used to produce ethanol. For example, the sugar industry using molasses, it can produce ethanol. And in fact, by using maize also we can produce ethanol. So therefore, in order to meet the growing demand for the biofuels, this potential trade deal between US and India will include the import of ethanol and the genetically modified maize for the fuel blending. Now, why sugar industries have been opposing this? We have to understand this. Why sugar industries have been opposing this move? Because as of now, the sugar industries have been earning a lot through generating ethanol, right? So because of a huge demand for ethanol domestically, the sugar industries, along with producing sugar, they are also producing ethanol as well, right? So if India imports ethanol from US, then it will badly impact the domestic sugar mills or the sugar industries, and that's the first reason why the sugar industries have been opposing the import of ethanol or the genetically modified maize for the production of ethanol. However, now why the soybean industry has been opposing this? Now, soybean processing industry is against genetically modified soybean imports. Now, in fact, again, the genetically modified soybean will not be used as a food. In India, it will not be used as a food, and again, the genetically modified soybean will be used as a feedstock to generate ethanol. And in fact, the soybean processing industry has also been strongly opposing the import of the GM soybean, and sugar industry has also been opposing the import of ethanol and GM maize. And as I have already told you that USA is the largest producer as well as exporter of both maize and ethanol, right? So the largest producer of maize is US, and US is also the largest producer of ethanol. So you just have to remember these two facts. Now, in fact, USA is the second biggest producer and exporter of soybean after Brazil. Now here Brazil is the top producer of soybean, right? So you just remember this. And after Brazil, USA is the second largest producer and exporter of soybean. Now, nowadays USA has been looking for new markets so that it can export ethanol, GM maize and GM soybean, right? So there have been a global geopolitical shifts that have been taking place. And amidst the global geopolitical shifts, USA has been looking for new markets, and in fact, a lot of pressure on Indian side also to ease import restrictions so that USA can actually export the ethanol, GM maize and GM soybean into India, right? So India has also facing a lot of pressure from USA in this context, but the domestic agriculture industries have been expressing concern about this. I hope the first part is very clear for you. Next, ethanol blending, a policy success. Now, I have already explained this, why the government of India blending ethanol into petrol, and there is already a program called, ethanol blended petrol program, and we would like to blend around 20% of ethanol into petrol, right? So we would like to achieve this goal, and because of that reason there is an increased demand for ethanol, right? So there is a huge demand for ethanol, right? So that's why in order to meet the demand, the government of India has been planning to import the GM maize, GM soybean and also ethanol from USA as part of the trade deal. Now in India, the ethanol blending program has grown significantly under the current government, And in fact, 2013 and 14, the average blending of ethanol into petrol was just 1.5%, and that has increased to 14.6% by the year 2023 and 24. So this is actually a huge jump, right? And this will substantially reduce India's dependence on import of crude oil from other countries. Remember, 85% of the crude oil we have been importing from other countries. Now, when we started blending ethanol into petrol, it will reduce our reliance or dependence on the crude oil, and it will also reduce the import bill as well. However, in the current supply year, financial year 2024 and 2025, so the blending ratio has actually reached to 18.85%, and that is very close to the 20% target set for 25-26, right? So it is said that we have almost achieved 20% blending of ethanol into the petrol. And in future, there might be a phased increase in blending of ethanol into petrol to reduce the crude oil imports and also reduce import bill, and also save our ensure the energy security, I would say, to achieve energy security and protect ourselves from the global energy shocks as well, because in case of a volatility, so that will substantially increases the crude oil prices, and that will lead to the cost push inflation in India. So therefore, we need to protect our economy from the external shocks. So in that aspect also, ethanol blending will play a very important role. Now, I hope this part is also clear for you. Now, what is the concern for the millers, the sugar industries and soybean industries over the ethanol imports from USA? So we'll be understanding this. Now, in fact, the sugar millers are actually worried that sugarcane is losing importance. So they can no longer dependent on manufacturing, processing sugar only, because now ethanol has been getting a lot of traction, a lot of focus, and there is a growing demand for ethanol as well. Now, these domestic sugar industries, soybean industries, so if they can actually manufacture ethanol, then there is a huge prospect of these industries would become a success, right? So therefore, the sugar cane is losing importance as more ethanol is now being made from grains like maize, right? And in fact, the sugar industries, they also fear that if India starts importing ethanol or genetically modified maize, sugarcane will be pushed aside even more. So there will be less dependence on sugarcane for the production of ethanol if India started importing ethanol, starts importing the GM maize and GM soybean, and that's why they are opposing this. And in fact, the sugar consumption in India is not growing, right? So it is stagnant over the years. The sugar consumption, a sugar demand is also stagnant in nature. So because of this reason, now millers have been looking for ethanol generation as a future. So ethanol generation would be the future for the sugar industries, right? So for example, now ethanol is blended into petrol, diesel and aviation fuel rather than solely producing sugar alone, right? So that's why the sugar industries have been strongly opposing the import of ethanol and import of GM maize into India. However, Niti Aayog paper, so Niti Aayog has actually published a working paper. So in this working paper, Niti Aayog has suggested that importing cheaper US maize for ethanol. Niti Aayog has strongly suggested that India needs to import genetically modified maize for ethanol production from US. And in fact, its byproducts including distillers, dried grains with solubles, and they can be, right? So byproducts of, for example, when we imported GM maize from US and we convert the GM maize into ethanol, and it generates certain byproducts. So they are being called as distillers, dried grains with solubles, and these byproducts can be exported to avoid the domestic feed concerns, right? So it will not be used as a feedstock in India. So therefore the feedstock or the byproducts that are being generated can be exported to avoid the domestic feed concerns, and that is what the Niti Aayog has clearly suggested here. However, the authors claim this will help India meet the biofuel targets without disturbing the local food chains, right? So in fact, what is the relation between the food chains and biofuel production? And this is very important, and you have to understand this. Now, when I say that the food chain and biofuel generation, right? So biofuel generation. Now in this context, so imagine that biofuels are generated from sugarcane, right? So sugarcane and soya bean, maize can also be used. Maize can also be used for the generation of biofuels. Now we all knew that India is the most populous country in the world, right? So most populous country in the world, and food security for India's population is a primary concern for us. And simultaneously, side by side, there is a growing demand. There is a growing demand for alternative fuels, such as these biofuels, such as ethanol. Now here the ethanol is produced from the food grains. Now if we divert these food grains for the production of ethanol, what happens? Then we may not be ensure food security for our populations. So it is important that whatever food that has been produced, and that food must be used to ensure food security, right? But if we divert the food that has been generated to produce these biofuels, we will not be able to ensure food security for our populations. So as a solution, Niti Aayog has suggested that you just import GM maize from US, right? So you have to import GM maize from US and use this GM maize for the production of biofuels. So there will be no pressure on the local food chains. Whatever food that has been produced in India, and that food can be used to ensure food security in India itself. So I hope it is clear for you, right? Now what are the concerns of the soybean industry? So what are the concerns, major concerns that the soybean industry has been expressing? So a Niti Aayog paper again suggested that importing GM soybean, right? So Niti Aayog paper suggested import GM soybean and extract oil from the imported GM soybean, and this oil can be used for the domestic use, and export the leftover GM based de-oiled cake, or which is called as meal, right? So this is what Niti Aayog has actually suggested with respect to the GM soybean. On this, the soybean industry has expressed some concerns. Now what are the concerns that the soybean industry has expressed? So the Soybean Processing Association of India, it actually rejects the proposal due to the logistical and economic challenges which are existing, right? So it says that there are some logistical as well as the economic challenges which are existing, and because of that particular reason we may not be able to process the imported soybean, and we may not be able to export the soybean meal back to other countries. Right? This is what the Soybean Processing Association of India has said, because the most solvent extraction units, so they are located inland, so they are not close to the ports, right? So they have to locate close to ports so that the cake or the meal, soybean meal, can be easily exported to other countries. But the solvent extraction units are located in Madhya Pradesh, they are located in states like Maharashtra, so they are located inland, so they are far away from the ports as well. So therefore, transporting the imported beans to these solvent extraction plants and then again exporting the meal to other countries, we need to transport them back to the ports. So therefore, it is a very cost effective, and such a policy would threaten the livelihood of nearly 7 million soybean farmers. And that's why the Soybean Processing Association of India has opposed the decision of the government, or the paper suggested by the Niti Aayog, to import the genetically modified soybean into India. So therefore, in this context, any trade deal between India and US, that has to be sensitive and careful, prudent with respect to the agriculture sector in India, because the sugar mills or sugar industry are still making losses, and it is also important to protect the life and livelihoods of the farmers in India as well, right? So the next important topic is about, recently a series of changes are taking place in geopolitics, right? So particularly in Israel, Israel Hamas conflict, and some proxy groups of Iran such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, so they planned attacks against Israel, and in retaliation Israel attacked Iran, and Iran again attacked Israel. However, US has intervened here, and US has also bombed some nuclear installations in Iran. However, here the objective is to make sure Iran will not have the nuclear weapons. Iran will not procure the nuclear weapons, and that is the objective, because it can be considered as an existential threat for Israel. And that's why US intervened. And US has bombed the nuclear installations, nuclear facilities which are located in Iran. And after that, Iran again attacked some military bases. Of US which are located in Qatar, right? So series of events have been taking place. Now in this context, last few days I have been explaining that Iran is looking to acquire nuclear weapons, right? So it wanted to develop the nuclear weapons. However, US and Israel strongly against Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. And in order to acquire these nuclear weapons, Iran is already enriching the uranium, right? So in fact, Iran has some nuclear enrichment facilities. So recently, US bombed these nuclear enrichment facilities and the stockpiles of enriched uranium and its centrifugal facilities, right? So recently, Iran has also decided to withdraw its membership from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we have understood what is nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So this is a legally binding treaty that has been signed by almost 191 countries, and the objective of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty is to make sure that apart from P5 countries, no other country should develop the nuclear weapons, right? So that is the objective of nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So the technology will have to be used for the civilian purposes, right? So that is the objective of nuclear non-proliferation treaty that has been signed by almost 191 countries. So Iran has decided to withdraw its membership from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and Iran also planned to withdraw itself or withdraw its nuclear reactors inspection from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now in this context, what will be the challenges before the International Atomic Energy Agency on with respect to the inspection of nuclear facilities or nuclear sites in Iran? So we'll try to understand this in a much more deeper manner. Now, yesterday we discussed about this, that USA has carried out attacks on Iran nuclear facilities such as Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan. So these are the three places where US has carried out attacks, and in fact these are the underground nuclear sites which are located in Iran. So USA has used B-2 bombers, and these B-2 bombers are stealth and they cannot be identified, they cannot be recognized. So they went deep inside Iran and they carried out successful strikes against some nuclear installations in Iran. Now we have already discussed about this. The Fordo is Iran's most heavily fortified nuclear site, and this Fordo is used for nuclear enrichment. And in fact, the Fordo is built deep beneath a mountain. And secondly, Natanz is the largest uranium enrichment facility in Iran. And Isfahan is Iran's largest nuclear research site, which was targeted by Israel 2 times since the crisis that has been begun in June 13. Now I hope it is clear for you. Now we'll understand the context. So the context is that US and Israel, so they have targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, right? So as I have already told you that US has carried out precision strikes against Iran, targeting nuclear facilities in Iran, and in fact a first in global nuclear energy history, right? So such an attack is considered as a first in global nuclear energy history. However, after these attacks carried out by US, there is no current radiation spikes. Generally what happens whenever such attacks are reported, there is some radiation leak, but as of now there is no radiation spikes. But there are concerns over the nuclear material security and the potential radiological consequences and the access to the International Atomic Energy Agency to those nuclear facilities. So in case of any leakage from those nuclear facilities, the International Atomic Energy Agency must access those facilities to conduct a deeper and a detailed analysis. However, the Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Mariano Grossi, so he reported that the damage, so there is some damage, but he also stressed that there's a difficulty in accessing the sites in Iran for inspection and also implementing the safeguards system. Now this safeguards system is the system which is put in place by the International Atomic Energy Agency, right? So now what are the key challenges for the International Atomic Energy Agency? So we'll try to understand some key challenges that would be faced by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now in fact, the nuclear facilities such as Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan, so these are the 3 nuclear facilities that were hit by targeted and precision strikes by US. And in fact, these nuclear facilities are partially underground, right? So they are underground, and because of that reason, it is very difficult to carry out such a strikes against these facilities. So since they are underground, it is also not easy to carry out the damage assessment. We cannot easily carry out the damage assessment, and in fact it also poses risks to the nuclear fuel cycle and overall nuclear power plants infrastructure, right? So since they are located underground, that is the first concern, first challenge for the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect these sites. Secondly, the International Atomic Energy Agency is unable to conduct the on-site inspections, right? So since it is unable to conduct the on-site inspection, it has been raising verification delays, safety risks, and overall hampering the implementation safeguards and the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspections. So inspections have to be carried out on time without any delay, right? But here the problem is that there are verification delays and there might be safety risks as well, and all these factors would hamper the implementation of safeguard measures and the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspections as well. And in fact, a movement of 400 kg of enriched uranium would increases the risk of material diversion and the unauthorized removal as well. So these factors would further challenge the nuclear material accountancy and the physical protection measures as well. However, the potential for unaccounted nuclear material, so this will further leads to illicit use or nuclear proliferation. Thereby, it would challenge the nuclear security regime, and it would further necessitate enhanced threat assessment protocols as well. So remember, the objective here is that to prevent proliferation of nuclear weapons, to ensure that the nuclear energy and the technology will be used for the peaceful civilian purposes such as energy generation, and also ensure that there will be no radiation leakage. Now, what will be the International Atomic Energy Agency's role in addressing this aftermath of the attacks by US on Iran? Now, if you look at the immediate response of International Atomic Energy Agency, so the IAEA, so it must work to regain access to the affected sites, right? So whatever sites which are affected in Iran, so the International Atomic Energy Agency must work to regain access, right? So as quickly as possible, as early as possible, so that the International Atomic Energy Agency can actually assess the potential radiological consequences, and it can also verify the status of nuclear material in Iran. Secondly, there is a need for enhanced monitoring. So in order to enhance the monitoring, the International Atomic Energy Agency need to implement a more robust monitoring techniques, including remote monitoring systems to compensate for access limitations. So it would be a bit more technical in nature, but this is how it is actually, right? So ultimately, to ensure that Iran would not go for a large scale nuclear proliferation, because that would completely threaten the regional security, and in fact it would also lead to increased radiation that will threaten the lives of the people, right? So there is also a need for the international cooperation in this context, right? So there is a need to strengthen collaboration with member states to gather intelligence, improve the threat assessment capabilities related to potential nuclear security events. And this has to be done by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there should be some safeguard obligations as well. So in order to ensure that, the International Atomic Energy Agency, it must work with Iran so that it can ensure a continued compliance with the safeguards that are already put in place, despite the challenging circumstances which are existing on the field, and therefore maintain integrity of the global non-proliferation is also very, very important. So we need to talk about some transparency measures as well. So encourage all parties which are involved to provide maximum transparency to help rebuild trust in the international community, and also support the International Atomic Energy Agency's vital role in global nuclear security. So a consensus-based collaborative approach is required to further strengthen the role of International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure the safeguards regime, or better implementation of the safeguards regime. Now, when US attacked nuclear facilities in Iran, so Iran retaliates and Iran hits US base in Qatar. We'll be discussing about this and the implications or consequences on India as well. The context is that Iran's missile strike. So Iran's missile strike has hit or has struck US Air Base in Qatar, which is AI Udaid Air Base. So this Al Udaid Air Base, which is located in Qatar, right? So Al Udaid Air Base is located in Qatar. Before this, USA has carried out the precision strikes, and US has also struck in sites and Isfahan, and for that Iran retaliated, and Iran has also launched missiles targeting Al Udaid Air Base, which is located in Qatar. And this Al Udaid Air Base serves as the right. So the air base is located in Qatar. So in fact, when we talk about the details of this particular air base, so this air base hosts around 10,000 troops, and it also accommodate forces of US Air Force, Qatar Emir Air Force, and UK's Royal Air Force, and other allied nations, and total it hosts around 10,000 troops. And in fact, the Al Udaid Air Base actually equipped with long runways, and these long runways support rapid deployment. So therefore, for US, for its force projection, the Al Udaid Air Base is a very important air base, and in fact it has been critical in its operations across Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So in entire Middle East, USA has stakes in including Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. So therefore, the Al Udaid Air Base is critical for USA's operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and rest of the Middle East. And the USA will also carry on from Al Udaid Air Base itself. And Qatar has actually invested around 8 billion in the upgrading Al Udaid infrastructure. So therefore, it will be more than, and it also reduces the financial burden on US taxpayers as well. So this is Al Udaid Air Base, which is located in Qatar, attacked by Iran as a retaliation against US attacks on its nuclear installations. Now here we'll understand the India-Qatar relationship here, right? So India actually shares a deep political and economic ties with Qatar. And in fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had a visit to Doha twice. Once in June 2016 and secondly in February 2024, Prime Minister Narendra Modi paid official visit to Qatar. Right? So that has been indicating that we have a deep political and economic ties with Qatar. And in fact, India also maintains a high level contacts with the Qatar's leadership, because in February 2025, so Amir of the state of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, so both countries, India and Qatar, have announced elevation of India-Qatar ties to the strategic partnership in just February 2025. Now, why Qatar is important for India? Diaspora populations, remittances, right? So diaspora, remittances, investment into India, right? So all these different aspects, Qatar is very, very 7% of the total population of Qatar are Indians alone, and Indians have been engaged in diverse sectors such as healthcare, education, construction, IT, media, and finance. Right? So, in all these diverse sectors, Indians have been engaged in. So, since Iran has carried out missile attacks on US airbase in Qatar, targeting US troops, US bases, US military assets, so India has been closely looking into it, because we have the diaspora population. We need to evacuate the diaspora population. That is not easy, because around 8,35,000 Indians are in Qatar for India's energy security. And for all these different reasons, Qatar is very, very important, right? So I hope you have understood this. And next important topic is the Statistics Ministry is planning to conduct the first ever household income survey in the year 2016. Now the context is that the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So this particular ministry has announced that India will conduct its first comprehensive household income survey in the year 2026. Right? So that is the context, and this is the first time that this household income survey at the national level will be conducted by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in the year 2026. Now, in fact, this is a nationwide household income survey, and this aimed at generating a robust and most reliable data on income distribution across India for the first time. Now, what are its features? Now, when we talk about its features, it is the first nationwide survey, and it solely focuses on the household income distribution. Right? So there is a possibility of such things might be asked in your prelims examination. Right? So it will be the first household income survey, and that is going to be conducted by the Ministry of Statistics. And it will be overseen by the technical expert group to incorporate the global best practices. Similarly, it focuses on developing the conceptual clarity, sampling design, and the estimation methodology. Right? So the technical expert group would focuses on developing conceptual clarity, sampling design, and estimation methodology. And it even incorporates digital tools to improve accuracy and also capture impact of technology on wages and income. And it even builds on Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation's recent statistical innovations such as unincorporated sector survey, service sectors, and private capital expenditure and tourism data. All these factors would be taken into consideration. And the next topic is, there is a sharp increase in a number of women Maoists who were killed in security operations, according to a data released by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Right? So, in fact, you know, women of Maoists, they actually play a very, very important role in Maoist cadres. So recently, there has been an aggressive operations that have been carried out against the Maoist all across India. So in these attacks by the security forces against Maoists, so there has been a substantial increase in the women Maoists. For example, in the year 2019, there has been 26.2 percentage of total Maoists who were killed. They are women, and 17.5% of women in 2020, and 21 it was 25.5%, and 22 it was 30%, and 23 it was 25%, and 24 it was 34.1%, and 2025 it was 42.1%, highest in 2025. Right? So in fact, women are also attracted towards the left wing extremism because of a number of reasons. So therefore, there are some systematic issues that have to be addressed. And those systematic issues need to be identified and that have to be addressed to prevent or to prohibit women entering into the Maoist cadres. Since women are vulnerable, the woman death rate is also very high in the left wing extremism. So I'm not saying that women are weak, but there are a lot of issues, and those structural issues must be addressed to encourage women getting into the education, women becoming entrepreneurs rather than attracted towards the left wing extremism, because that would have disastrous consequences for women. And I hope you have understood this, and that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you like a lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the